one of the things as an internal auditor that you have to subscribe to is independence. And so as a taxpayer, one of the things that concerns me right now is that in the St. Tammany Parish School Board, the internal auditor that they have essentially reports to the people that he audits. And I see these findings over and over and over again. That tells me that no one is listening. He's not effective. That tells me that there's no teeth to the function. That tells me that the internal controls, at least for what he's looking at in the schools, are out of control.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abby Licatino, and I am here with Miss Melissa. And we're going to do an interesting conversation here just to kind of educate ourselves and prepare ourselves as voters to learn a little more about some topics that may be a little more complicated. So Miss Melissa is an expert, and she's going to give us a little bit of a background of what her credentials are, but she's basically a certified internal auditor. And so I appreciate you being here, Melissa. Thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to learning some new things from you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, do you want to kind of, I know that we have, the school board race going on right now. And I know that there's questions about the internal auditor that we currently have, and, lots of things being kind of thrown around out there. And I just wanted to kind of pick your brain as being an internal auditor. Give us, the basics on what one is, like what they do, and the good, bad, and ugly, I guess, of all of that.
Sure. So I do have a background in internal audit. That's not what I'm doing currently. I have my own business actually right now. I have been a certified internal auditor since 2010. And so I do have to subscribe to all of the, we have a framework of standards that all internal auditors have to, we all have to subscribe to, we have to abide by. And so one of the things as an internal auditor that you have to subscribe to is independence. And so as a taxpayer, one of the things that concerns me right now is that in the St. Tammany Parish School Board, the internal auditor that they have essentially reports to the people that he audits. And so I don't know if you can kind of understand how that could be a conflict, but when that happens, that internal auditor could be threatened with the loss of a job, could be threatened with loss of resources. So right now that school board is big enough probably to have a team of 5 or 6 auditors. And so Marie Wade was a candidate several years ago. She's also an internal auditor. She has lots of experience. And that her and I have discussed that several times, that, I mean, to really cover everything in the school board that needs to be covered and to have a true internal audit function, one, it has to report to the school board, or at least has to have some connection to the school board, and that the school board is the one that is guiding the work. So right now, the way that things are, the work of the internal auditor is being guided by the administration. And whether that's the business director, the superintendent, I think he reports to the superintendent. But as far as like what he actually audits, I don't think there's any input from the board. I think the input that the board has is directly from the superintendent or directly from the director of the business affairs department. So in that, if that's the structure, you're already setting yourself up for a situation where there's no independence. And so I don't think the gentleman that's there right now, I don't think he's certified. So I don't think that he has anything to lose, although our standards do say that whether you're certified or not, that you should be subscribing to the standards. And so there's a whole framework of standards that he should be looking at, and he should know. And so that's what I have a problem with, is that whole independence and the hierarchy and where he is, it's almost like, I don't want to say that he's not doing some good, But if you think about it, would we almost be better not wasting taxpayer dollars on his salary because he has to get educated, he has to have continuing education, he probably travels. So, I mean, we're spending money on not only his salary, but other administrative things to keep him in that position. And what benefit are we getting? I mean, we need to make sure that whatever he's providing us is value enough that that value is more than what he cost us as taxpayers.
Right.
You know, there's been no proof of that. Nobody has said, yeah, but he saves us much money. If you look at the internal audit reports that he's generated, he's only auditing the school funds. It doesn't look like he has any audit reports that are being generated. I don't want to say published or issued because I don't even know if he formally issues anything. But those audit reports, they only address school issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be the same findings over and over and over again. So in order for that internal audit function to be valuable, you would start to see those findings decrease, or there would be some proof somewhere that, okay, you know, the first year we found this much, you know, that had an effect of this much money. And then the next year that it would decrease, and the next year that it would decrease. And so that his recommendations were actually being adhered to. And I don't think that's happening either, because nobody reports to him. He has no teeth, and shouldn't. An internal auditor shouldn't be the one to make the policy. We should be auditing to whatever the policy is that the school board makes. So those policies are just being, the administration is making those policies.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So because this is all new to me, so I'm just learning along with the viewer here. My questions are, so in government, is it normal to have an internal auditor? Like, let's look at our state government, and there's probably multiple because the state budget is probably massive, even more than ours. And from what I've seen, our budget in St. Tammany is very large. It's $500 million or close to $500 million. Like, what is typical for how many internal auditors that kind of budget should have? The government that we have, you know, the state government, how many do they typically have? And who do they report to? And like, have we compared like St. Tammany, like what our procedure is to like another government entity? And are we doing what's subscribed to other government entities? Does that make sense?
Right. Oh, yeah. So in Louisiana, our laws say that every agency above a certain amount of revenue has to have an independent internal auditor, meaning that auditor has to report to a board. So according to those rules and that law, that the Department of Education that has a state budget line, that one definitely has an internal audit function, and it is truly independent. Even though our budget is, I think we figured it out, it was like 17 times more than what that threshold was. Even though that's what our budget is, there is no law to say that it has to be there. It doesn't have to exist. So we could go without one and nobody's really breaking any laws. The taxpayers are going to have to demand this. And because but
typically, I mean, maybe government isn't a good example, but look at a business that has a $500 million, that typically, I mean, like, we know our government is not the best with doing things the right way. And I'm not blaming anyone. It's just, it's huge. I understand that. However, as taxpayers, and when we have a board that we can elect, so is that also part of the procedure, is that an independent internal auditor reports to a board that's elected so that there is some sort of check and balance and accountability going on? Is that also part of this, how it's supposed to work?
Right. And so, like, basically, the law does kind of give you a little bit of room to say that if you have less than that amount in revenue, obviously you're not going to be able to afford a lot of things, lack of resources. So you may not be able to afford an internal auditor. So they're not going to mandate that you have one, much less one that's independent. But above that point, and don't quote me, but I want to say that it's like 35 million,
Okay.
50 million. I can't remember what the threshold is, but
Right.
it's not much. I mean, we have so much more money flowing through our operating budget in this parish that we absolutely could fall in that law if it just didn't have those words that said you have to be on the state budget line. So yeah, I mean, all things
Due diligence
but look,
for a taxpayer, due diligence for a taxpayer is with this kind of money. Personally, I would want someone making sure that there's, I mean, and we're not even considering that there's any bad stuff going on. Just
yes,
checks and balances. I
yeah,
mean, my husband and I do our own budget, and ours is nothing close to this, but we check
right.
and balance each other. And then we have an accountant, and then we have a tax attorney. And so we have multiple people checking what we're doing. But,
Yeah.
I
work with
okay.
small businesses. I work with small businesses all the time. I do consulting gigs. I mean, I do bookkeeping.
Right.
I provide counsel
Mhm.
from an accounting sense to these small businesses. I don't work with very many people that aren't interested in internal control.
Right. Well, it just
Now,
makes sense, like you said, that he can be worth his salary by saving us that amount. And I mean, wouldn't that's just a positive? And if we could get 3 of them and pay 3 salaries, yeah, we might be paying 3 new people. But if they're saving us millions, they're not getting paid millions. So there could be a lot of waste, maybe, and not bad stuff, shady stuff, but just waste, maybe, that it can be saved. I
yeah,
like that.
and
Yeah, that makes sense.
lately I've heard just I haven't watched a whole lot of the meetings lately, but I did hear something about somebody in the administration said that they have internal controls, and that's fine, but nobody answered the follow-up question. Okay, tell me what they are.
Mhm.
Show me what they are, tell me what they are,
Mhm.
what do we have, what's in place,
Mhm.
and then show me where those things have been audited. Because we do have an external audit, which is a lot different than an internal audit. An internal audit deals with processes, with controls, operations. The internal audit can deal with a lot of different things, not just the financial piece. But of course, usually in government, it's heavy on that because you follow the money. You want to save the money, or you want to save, from waste, from inefficiencies. Those
Mhm.
are definitely things that an internal audit in government, that function is probably going to focus on. So with the external audit, it's very different. And so that is just to uncover what's called material misstatements that are caused by errors, fraud, whatever. Well, what's material to our budget in the St. Tammany Parish School Board, I'm just speaking as as a layperson, what's material to me as a taxpayer could be as little as $100,000. I mean, if somebody steals $100,000, so there's $100,000 mistake, for me as a taxpayer, I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But for me as an external auditor, I'm not concerned about that because there's materiality. And so because these external auditors, they don't have to audit every single transaction. And there are things that get missed, and they get missed, and not necessarily missed. They do what's called a pass on it. So if they see something and they know for sure that it's fraud or that there's something wrong, well, of course they have to address it.
Mhm.
But if it's just something that kind of comes up and it's not really, it has to be really worth the time to investigate whatever that is.
Mhm.
If it's not, they are going to pass on it. So what's material to them may not necessarily be material to a taxpayer. So what is supposed to be the role of an internal auditor is that the internal auditor is supposed to kind of come in and fill that space,
All
and
that little
then
stuff.
put all the stuff, and say, oh, well, we have these processes and we have separation of duties and we have this and we have that, that ensures that those financial statements are correct.
Right.
And because we have different sources of funding in the St. Tammany Parish School Board, we have student activity funds, we have operating dollars. It seems that the school board is limiting what that internal audit function can look at. And right now they're only looking at schools, which some schools have a larger budget. I mean, some schools have, $500,000. Some schools have very little. And so, I don't follow what his procedures are. And I haven't really looked at them. I read a couple of reports about the scope of what he's actually looking at. But basically, I guess you could liken what he's doing to a checkbook review.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like if I'm a taxpayer, I want to see more than that. And I want to just make sure, because when I see these findings over and over and over again, that tells me that no one is listening. He's not effective. That tells me that there's no teeth to the function. That tells me that the internal controls, at least for what he's looking at in the schools, are out of control. And so
if he has concerns, if it was set up the way that you think that it should be set up as far as being independent, is he would report directly to the school board will review and then generate questions to ask who? Like, how would the accountability go? Like, what is the proper accountability line?
Right.
What an independent internal auditor is supposed to be doing.
So what would happen is there's something called a risk assessment, and your internal auditor is responsible for that risk assessment. You're supposed to look at the entire universe. You're supposed to look at the entire population of the entire organization. And so what you do is through interviews, through your own, experiences and knowledge, you're supposed to do a very thorough risk assessment. You're supposed to present that risk assessment to the board, that you report to, and you're supposed to discuss. And the board is supposed to make those decisions. And the board is supposed to say, look, we know, like, let's say that St. Tammany Parish didn't have any money to afford an internal auditor. And they said, man, there's only one of you. So we are just going to have to pick the top things that are the most risky to us. We're just going to follow the money. Mm-hmm. And so that may be, I don't know. I mean, like they may have heard that, they're having a problem in a certain area, and maybe there was some payroll fraud. So maybe they put them on payroll. Maybe they heard that there's some inappropriate behavior, that is risky too. So maybe they feel that they have some risk, some liability, because they have maybe some employees who are doing things that put the system at risk. It could be a process like that. It could be like, okay, do we have that type of training in place? Do we have all of our ducks in order that we're addressing those things so that we are not opening ourselves up to that type of risk? It could be anything. It could be.
Wow. So an internal auditor does all of that as well.
Everything.
Wow.
Everything. But in government, generally, you end up just looking at you're following the money. But in an organization, they look at all those things. They look at reputational risk. They look at, what could set an organization up. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. All that. What litigation, where are we opening ourselves up for litigation, all kinds of stuff. So I can tell you right now that he's not doing any of that. So that's in the ideal situation, that's what would happen. Right. That internal auditor goes to the board and shows them that risk assessment and says, these are the things that are coming up as high in my opinion. Now, the board hires that person, so they have to rely on his experience, and they have to rely on his professional skepticism and his, interviewing people that he ranks things, and they can either agree or disagree. Mm-hmm. Now, if they don't like his risk assessment, they can always fire him. I mean, it's not like they're the ones that choose him. So they go through the risk assessment process, and then they say, okay, these are the things that are hitting high. And so we think that we have the time budget in the next 3 years to work on X, Y, and Z. And we're going to leave ourselves a little bit of space, maybe 20% of our time budget for things that might pop up. But these are our goals for the next 3 years. We want you to look at these things for us. So of course, you're not going to hit everything. Mm-hmm. You're certainly not going to hit every transaction, but these are the higher risk things. Well, the board, I don't even think understands what a risk assessment is. I don't know if those words have ever even been said in front of them. I don't think they understand. So through that process, I guess they claim that they have a risk assessment, I think, at the school board, but it's only the higher risk schools. Okay. And I don't know how they choose.
So there are entities out there. So, because like I think we're in the situation where what you don't know is really not good, right? So there are entities out there that's what they do, right? They come into these businesses, government agencies, and they have risk assessment auditors that are like a team, and they are able to look at everything, kind of address everything that could be a possible risk, including financial. And then they meet with the board, and the board decides what's the priorities and sets up a timeline on
well, that's your auditor. So like when the board hires the person that they are hiring, the internal audit chief, like there's a head auditor, a staff underneath them. He's responsible, she or he is responsible for presenting his version of the risk assessment to the board. And then they kind of come together and they make those decisions on what is going to be audited. Everything has to be risk-based according to our standards. And so you hook back up to the risk, and this is the risk assessment. These are the things. So what it does two things. It prevents an auditor from going after the wrong people. So you can't politically go after somebody just because somebody doesn't like someone. It has to be risk-based. And then the other thing is you can't make the auditor count pencils in the basement. If it's all risk-based and it all makes sense and everybody on the board
agrees,
likes the risk assessment and they like what it's showing and they agree with it, now they have time for debate and to decide if that's not it. But you don't want either way to happen. You don't want people to be targeted for non-risk things. It's supposed to be completely objective and based on that risk assessment. And so if you go back to the risk assessment, you will have the right type of function in place.
Okay. And to ask you from a board perspective, is you would have this meeting, is it public or is this like not public? This back and forth with the internal auditor assessing risk.
Right. So you don't want to put it out there. I don't think it's necessary that you do that publicly. I think because you don't want to put it out there what you're looking at. That really is more something that's between the board, and that is their tool to look into the organization without the administration guiding that communication. It's their independent way to say, are we doing what we need to be doing?
Right.
And so
because I would think the administration is part of the audit. So it would be a conflict of interest to be able to have them watching over it, because the board is supposed to be independent of everything, but especially in follow the money, right? So you don't want someone that is being audited to be a part of the discussion. So that makes sense. Okay.
Well, and I mean, and if it is like, I mean, if it were to ever come to that in the board, if the board said, we do want to look at the expense reports of our superintendent.
Right.
They should be able to do that.
Yeah, they should
be able to.
Yeah.
And it should be between them, the internal auditor, and the board, and they just guide the steps. That way the auditor reports administratively to the superintendent, meaning the superintendent, they have to report like your vacation time and that kind of stuff. But functionally, how you function should be what the board guides the internal auditor to look at. But they should be free to look at those expense reports or whatever it is that they want. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term, the tail's wagging the dog. Right now, the tail is wagging the dog. So these people that we have elected are not really in positions of oversight. They are actually, their communication is being hindered, even like in the public. Like, I think that if we were to talk to a board member, I think if you look at their code of ethics, at least it was not too long ago, board members' code of ethics, there was this one item that really concerned me because it said that they will receive communication only from the superintendent.
Like any communication?
Yeah, like I don't understand that. And now, granted, there are some people that don't, I mean, like we do have some good people on the board that will listen to the public, and they will go and talk and get independent viewpoints on things. But for the most part, their communication is controlled by the administration.
Okay, so they're neglecting their role of being independent and being responsible to the public and the taxpayer
And that's
with that authority.
historical. Yeah, that's historical. I think that
But it's easy to do because it's the easy thing to do, right? I mean,
well,
it's understandable.
School boards. Yeah. This is school boards. And so they want this harmonious relationship between the superintendent and the board. And so if you look at the way that most school boards run, they kind of do run like that. They want harmony. They want it to all be
you want to be respectful in conversation, but harmony and being able to prevent things from escalating and becoming a problem is different. It's completely different. A board is supposed to be independent and is supposed to be holding everyone accountable, right?
Yeah.
On behalf of the taxpayer. So they are I call them a buffer zone. Like they are the buffer zone for the public to watch over the funds that are our tax dollars. So no, that is concerning. That's concerning if they're not independent and then they don't have independent eyes that are coming to them and supplying them with the data and the information. That is concerning. That is.
Yeah. So. And, also so if whether it was a taxpayer or whether it was an employee that may have reached out to the board to say, hey, I'm aware of a problem.
Right.
If the board cannot freely reach back out to that person, if the administration is able to step in and intercept that communication and say, oh, no, I'm going to guide that communication, and then retaliate against that employee.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that happen. That's one of the reasons I got involved in this whole thing 4 months ago is I was approached by teachers and they asked me to run for my district. And that was one of the teachers I spoke with. She was called into the principal's office and felt very uncomfortable, and her job was threatened because she had gone directly to the board versus going through the administration. And I've heard it over and over again. Actually, the more teachers that I speak with, the more they just do not feel safe to voice their opinion and to have, they ask me, keep it anonymous. I'm like, is the environment so toxic in the school that our teachers are scared to even voice, a concern? That's a problem because we have these teacher shortages and we have these sub shortages, and maybe it's because the environment is so toxic that no one wants to stay or tell friends about it. They're not, our biggest referral base is other teachers, right? And if they're like, no, you don't want to come to St. Tammany because you can't, that's upsetting. That makes me sad. And it makes it understandable why the board needs to remain independent and unadversarial with the public and with their teachers. They should be the safe haven for teachers to go to so that they know there won't be retaliation from the administration. That's scary. That really is very concerning.
Well, and so then you have these teachers that are kind of like, there's this escalation to commitment. And so when you have employees that reach a certain point and then their retirement is vested, and then they start to make decisions selfishly, and they should, that's their retirement. So they just kind of hunker down. And that's when they get really scared because look, school board for a teacher is the only gig in town. Right. You've got to go somewhere else to get a job. As an accountant, if I lose my job, there's other jobs that I can get as an accountant. As a teacher, maybe not so much. You might have to actually change industries, to get another job. So they really are the only gig in town. When you put all that together and you say, well, their retirement's based on it and stuff. So that's driving a lot of what basically happened. So the ones that are there that don't say anything, some of them are just surviving till they get out, even though they know some of the things that are there, are wrong. They see what's happening to other people when they speak out. They see people losing their jobs. They don't want that to happen. They may be, some of them have just enough money where they're married and they have just enough money to be ethical, and they're not scared and they do speak out. But
Right.
that's kind of the, the minority.
Right.
But
They're the ones that show up at public comment. Right. I mean, because that's the only way, from what I've been told, is that that's the only way people are going to hear what's going on, is by getting it on record in public comment. And, because they may have already sent emails to the board and it's falling on deaf ears, or it's not.
it's ignored. Yeah, you can't
So I do
email
have
them.
a question.
I've emailed. Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question. Like, we're talking about an internal auditor, what their roles are, and how they can be very helpful in finances, but in these risk assessments as well. Like, do you think they would identify a toxic environment in the schools? Like, that would be identified. And then they would be like, well, it's a risk assessment, it's this level, but it's compounding because this is actually attributing to lack of teachers, to your teacher shortage, so they'd be able to actually like define that.
Yeah, so that is what's called tone at the top. In the internal audit world, it's called tone at the top. Some people,
Wow.
I guess another word, maybe like another phrase that some people might use, on the street, might be culture. But in the internal audit world, we call it tone at the top. And, is the superintendent open to his expense reports being audited?
Right.
Is the superintendent communicating to everyone, hey, look, we don't tolerate certain behaviors, or we don't tolerate fraud. Right. But then when you turn around and they may say that, but then they may do something that contradicts that, well, then you have a problem. Right. And so there is a way to audit tone at the top. And certified internal auditors with experience will definitely know how to do that. Somebody who doesn't have that experience,
part of the culture.
You
definitely want someone independent, someone that's not a part of the culture. And I would say that goes for everything that the board uses to assess stuff, right? They probably want an independent lawyer, an independent accountant, independent everything, because they want to know all of the information without it being kind of manipulated. I don't even want to say manipulated, because that sounds bad, but the culture definitely can seep and run deep. So we need a board that can be independent to go beyond that, because if they don't have that strong, I guess, internal ability to do that, then they're just going to become a part of the problem rather than trying to stop it or reverse it or change it. So, okay, well, this has been really, really helpful. I appreciate your input. Do you have anything else, Miss Melissa, to kind of?
No, I was going to say, just to add, there is the Institute of Internal Auditors. They put out like a newsletter called Tone at the Top. And so once you start to learn about it, of course, a lot of it is board governance, what boards should be doing. It's a really interesting newsletter. And you can always contact the Institute of Internal Auditors, and they'll be more than happy to give you information about what an internal auditor is, what they're supposed to do, how you would benefit from having one. They're a great source of information. But yes, so my point in saying all that was that the tone at the top should definitely be considered in any risk assessment where the internal auditor is looking at the entire population and the entire organization. And so, like I said, it just all kind of goes back to, we just don't really have the right setup to have a true internal audit function that abides by those standards. Because he's only looking at the schools.
Right. And it just sounds like the thing that keeps repeating in my head is they just don't know what they don't know. And because they don't, like, I wouldn't know either unless you start asking questions and meeting people like you and understanding. And we actually have some candidates that are amazing business people. They probably know all this, but as a school board member, if you don't know that this is a possibility, that you can ask for it and that you can get it, then you wouldn't even know to ask for it, right? And that now hopefully will make it public knowledge that this is a possibility. Anyone that gets on the board, and in January, if this is something that they think is going to be beneficial to the board, to the school system, and to the public, and especially with our taxpayer money, then they need to request it and they need to research it, find this independent, separate from the culture, an internal auditor that's going to be able to do all of it. And maybe it's a team because it's such a big, a big entity with, 55 schools, 5,000 employees. I mean, like, seriously, this is a very large business that deserves to have a good team of internal auditors that can do these risk assessments and search for the monies that we can use in ways that can save maybe waste, and how can we do it better, right? Because that's what our taxpayers deserve and what anything this large deserves. So, man, that's really cool. And how educational is it in that we're learning that all they have to do is ask, right? All you have to do is ask. And this is a possibility that our new board, whoever's on it, can do. I love it. Fantastic. I'm always looking for streamlining, making things more efficient and better. So what a great idea. I'm going to put it on my list of things to ask from the new board.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Is there one last chance? Is there anything else you wanted to make sure it got out there or that you can educate us with?
Yeah, I mean, this is just my experience in just following the school board. And I don't want to end on a negative note, but I think that what you said, people can choose to know this, but some people are choosing not to know this. This information has been presented to the board in multiple emails, and there are public records galore that show that they have been educated about what this present board, especially, that what an internal auditor is. And some of them have just turned a blind eye to it. They say, well, that wasn't what I ran on. That wasn't my platform. So, I really don't want to get involved in that. And really, it just makes me wonder, maybe they just don't want to ruffle any feathers. And they're more concerned with making friends.
That's their job. That is so frustrating. So yeah. So I mean, the public needs to hear this, right? The public needs to hear this. I just think we want the best people on the board that can possibly be there. And so maybe that's a question we ask our candidates in our district is, are you in support of having a full-on, internal auditor that is going to do all of these things? That's not just a figurehead, but that actually has some teeth, some authority, that reports directly and only to the board at the beginning, and that maybe has a team that can do risk assessments and not just do the top priorities, because we have such a large business that needs to be audited, that it would be important. And maybe they can find some things that they didn't know were there, such as the reason for the teacher shortages. I don't know. Maybe that could be a possibility.
Absolutely.
So
get to some root causes of what's going on.
Yeah. So whether the board, the incumbents are reelected, I think they need to be held accountable that this is something that we want as a public. And if they're new coming in, some fresh new eyes, then maybe this can become something that they make a priority, and that we start off in the new season with some really, really good things put in place to help with managing such a large entity. So I love it.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I would love for that to happen. As a taxpayer, I'm all about doing anything that I can, to use my background to help that to happen. So absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Miss Melissa. I do appreciate your time. I'm going to end this here, and we'll go on to the rest of our evening. So thank you so much.
Take care.